Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel many times before. I've had some awesome beers from these guys over the years. They're one of my favourite Swedish breweries, one of the most reviewed breweries here on the channel, of course, and the beer that we're going to have a look at today is a little bit special. So if memory serves me correctly, this will be the highest ABV beer that I've reviewed from them. It's also a style that I know very well from them as well, and one that I know they do very nicely, and it's also a little bit of a special beer for them as well, actually. So very curious to see how it turns out. Hopefully it's another good beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing the Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition. And for this review, we're going to head a little bit out to the east of the city to Landvetter, very close to the airport. But that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from the wonderful Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called the 16 Stout. It comes in at 18% ABV, so it's an absolute monster. This is part of their Future series, their barrel aging program, and essentially this beer is a bourbon barrel-aged version of the 15 Stout that they released for their 15th anniversary. This one, of course, being released to celebrate the 16th anniversary. But this beer was released through Systembolaget on the 15th of June 2021, and if memory serves me correctly, I think I paid about 75 Swedish kronor for this one. So that comes out at around €7.50, just a bit shy of £7 sterling, and I guess somewhere in the region of $8.50 American. So for an 18% Imperial Stout, that is definitely a fair price, actually. I would have expected to pay neither like 100 kronor for this one or something like that. So for an 18% Imperial Stout, I think that is pretty damn impressive. But yeah, there's 15 different adjuncts in this one. The 16th is the barrel aging, I guess you could say, as well. But certainly looking forward to this one, and a very happy 16th anniversary to the wonderful Bryggeri as well. So yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. Very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. So yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Bryggeri before, and you will no doubt see me add more to that list in the near future because I love this brewery. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Bryggeri once again then, on to my brewery notes. So, as I've mentioned to you already, Bryggeri are based in Landvetter on the eastern outskirts of Gothenburg up on the Swedish west coast, and the brewery was established back in 2005 in Mölndal to the south of the city by Mikael Engström Dugge, who of course it takes its name from. But a few years prior to this, Mikael had met an Englishman who was selling second-hand breweries, and this really got him thinking about brewing his own beer. So he studied the admittedly very complex Swedish alcohol laws, which thankfully have liberalised since he founded the brewery. He visited various other breweries around the country and started buying up equipment to put together his own brewery, and this culminated with the opening of the first facility in Mölndal to the south of Gothenburg back in 2005. Over the first few years, the brewery built a very good reputation for themselves. Their beers proved to be very popular. They continually expanded the capacity, but by 2009 they'd outgrown this original facility, and so they made the decision to move to Landvetter, and they did this the following year in 2010. But the older brewery had a capacity of 1,500 hectolitres per year at maximum. However, the new brewery started off with a capacity of 8,000 hectolitres per year, and this has been more than doubled in recent years. I haven't actually seen an accurate figure for how much beer Bryggeri are producing in a year, but I imagine it's considerably more than 8,000 hectolitres per year. But over the years, this brewery have become very well known for quite a few different styles actually. In the early days, this brewery really made their name when it came to the kind of fruity sour beers. And also the big Imperial Stouts. Those are probably the two kind of cult classic styles, I guess you could say, from this brewery. The two beers I would recommend in that regard would be the Tropic Thunder, which is probably one of the first big sour beers that arrived that was here in Sweden. Of course, that's a collaboration with Stillwater Artisanal. You can still get that through Systembolaget quite easily. And also the Egypt, their big Imperial Stout, that was one of the ones that really made headlines back in the day, although this has since been replaced by the Big Egypt. I'd love to see them do a rebrew of the original Egypt, because that's one that I never got to try, unfortunately. So yeah, Tropic Thunder and Big Egypt would be the two beers that I would really recommend when you're first getting into this brewery. In more recent times, of course, they've been experimenting a lot with IPAs. They've got quite a few different IPA series of beers these days. They've got the Fresh and the Crush, which are the New England hazy IPAs. They've got the Bite series, which is the West Coast IPAs. They've also got a series of wheat beers that they're doing now. I forget the name of that one. There's the Future series, which are the big bourbon barrel aged or just barrel aged imperial stouts. This beer, of course, is a member of that series. They've also got the Mega series, which has just come out fairly recently. The last beer I reviewed from these guys, the Very Vanilla, was part of the Mega one. Those are the big heavy imperial stouts, at least 15% I think they're going to be. But they also have the Single Fruit series as well, actually, and you'll see me review my first beer from that series at some point fairly soon as well. But yeah, lots of different beers being released from this brewery. They're not afraid to try different styles, and that's one of the reasons why I really like this brewery. But another point to make about these guys is that they brewed some of the Omnipollo imperial stouts for quite a while, actually. I think Omnipollo still actually brew a number of their imperial stouts at Dugas Bryggeri, but they also are one of the co-owners of the two Brewers beer bars in Gothenburg. The original one is on Tredje Långgatan, and you can check out my out and about video that I filmed there if you're interested in that. And yeah, that's owned along with the guys from All In Brewing, and also I believe Electric Nurse Brewery. Electric Nurse is run by Mikael's daughter Ida and her husband John. So yeah, that's another very good brewery that you should check out. But there's a whole variety of different breweries in Gothenburg these days, and it is definitely worth going and checking out the Brewers Beer Bar in Gothenburg if you get the chance. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Dugas Bryggeri for the moment. I'm hoping that I can get up to Gothenburg at some stage and do an interview. I meet the brewery segment with Mikael. He did show an interest in that before when I asked him about it, but yeah, I'll need to contact him again because it's been quite a while actually since I was chatting to him. I think it was through Instagram that I chatted to him initially, but yeah, seems like a lovely guy, so it would be nice to feature him on the channel at some point in the future. But yeah, as I say, that's all I can really tell you about Dugas Bryggeri for the moment. Definitely a Swedish brewery that I keep an eye on, and one that I would recommend you guys have a go at as well. But if you want to learn more, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. But yeah, let's crack on then and have a little look at this beer itself. So just a little quick look at the artwork on this one before we open up. As you can see, this one is, you know, pretty much what you'd expect from Dugas Bryggeri in terms of their artwork. You can see this is the standard kind of symbol for Dugas. I do wish they would put that on the bottle caps. I say this in every video, I wish they had their own bottle caps, but you can see it's also part of the Future series as marked with this little symbol, and it mentions that at the bottom of the blurb as well. And there you can see Future Dugas barrel aging. But yeah, so this one contains wheat, rye and oats actually as well, which is kind of interesting. But it tells you on the side here a little bit about the beer, and it lists all the adjuncts for you. So in 2021 we're turning 16, so we've brewed this very special beer. This is 16 stout, an imperial stout with 16 different flavours. There's vanilla, cinnamon, cacao, tonka beans, licorice, salt, ginger, cardamom, muscovado sugar, coconut, coffee, poppy seeds, nutmeg, cloves and star anise in there, and then there's bourbon barrel aging. Hurrah. So yeah, as I said to you, this is basically the 15 stout that's been aged in bourbon barrels, and it's a few percent more in terms of its ABV. I think the 15 stout was actually 15% if I remember rightly. But yeah, 330 milliliter bottle, this one. So let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting. I'm really curious to see how this one turns out. Now, the 15 stout was quite interesting, and at the time I said that it wasn't one of my favourite stouts that I've had from Dugas Bryggeri, and I think it was good, but you know, I think there were better stouts that had been done before from Dugas Bryggeri, but the whole 15 thing was a little bit of a kind of novelty, I guess, if you like. You know, 15 adjuncts because we're 15 adjuncts because we're turning 15 years old. They had a 15 hop IPA and also a 15 fruit sour as well, which was kind of interesting. And they were nice beers, but they were just a little bit kind of overloaded in a sense. So I'm curious to see whether this one is a little bit more kind of balanced with the bourbon barrel aging and stuff like that. But yeah, if Dugas Bryggeri are doing a 16th anniversary Imperial Stout, then you can't really turn your nose up at that. You've got to review it, of course. I'm just surprised. I'm feeling how light this glass bottle is. They're making these thinner and thinner these days for recycling, which is great. Obviously, save the trees, love the environment, all of this kind of thing. So yeah, just a bit of a side note there. But anyway, but yeah, 15 adjuncts in this one and a bit of barrel aging to give you the 16th kind of flavour, I guess you could say. But yeah, I'm curious to see what effect the barrel aging has on this one, and what we will actually pick up out of this beer. But yeah, as you can see and as you would expect, this one's poured a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. Just let you have a little look at that. If we shine the light through this beer, it does have a tiny little hint of a kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi Max coloured edge to it around the just around the edge of the surface there, which is good. There's a wee bit of a slight foamy ring on it, and you can see the head is virtually non-existent in this one because it's it's virtually non-existent just because of how high the alcohol is. Usually needs a good bit of wheat in these beers to maintain the head, but when it's been bourbon barrel aged, you're going to lose the head holding capability in these things. But yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few small ones just going up towards the surface there, but overall it looks very, very nice, I have to say. So yeah, that's all we really need to say about the appearance of this one, but pretty much black as night, dark ebony rosewood kind of colour. But yeah, let's have a little look at the aroma then and just see how we get on with this one. Really curious about this, as I said. Oh, now that's interesting. There's a few of the adjuncts really come to the fore right away with this one. So the ginger and cardamom, they jump out of this one, I would say. Those are definitely coming out of that. You can smell that sort of spicy note to it. But definitely the aniseed and the licorice in this one, those are also playing quite a central role in the aroma here too. And of course, the one thing you have to remember, when it comes to barrel aging, it's going to take away a little bit of the mouthfeel, but give you a lot of infused flavour actually. So I'm curious to see how this translates into the flavour when you've got so many adjuncts at play. So this beer is definitely going to be a bit of a unique experience, should we say. But yeah, the aroma of that is just insane. It's crazy. So yeah, where do we start with this? Because there's so much going on. It's a little bit like sensory overload. But yeah, let's start with this then. So the backbone of the beer, you can smell that lovely smooth oaky character out of it. There's definitely the vanilla, I think, starts to come out a little bit more as your nose adjusts to the beer, and you can smell that kind of layer of bourbon brown sugars in there. The last beer I reviewed actually was another Imperial Stout that was Scotch whisky barrel aged. As I was mentioning that, when it comes to bourbon barrel aging, it gives you these very smooth, lovely kind of infused flavours, whereas the Scottish whisky, the Scotch whisky barrel aging is a lot more kind of dominant and kind of pungent, I guess you could say, in terms of flavour and aroma. So bourbon barrel aging is really interesting. I've been finding myself really interested in cognac barrel aging, and what was the other one we've had? We've had a few grappa barrel aged beers which have been very interesting too. But yeah, the bourbon barrel aged backbone of this one is very, very nice. But like I say, on top of this, you can smell it. On top of the woody notes, you can definitely smell a little bit of a kind of slick dark chocolate to this one. The chocolate doesn't smell overly bitter in a sense, and I think that's probably because of all the other adjuncts that are in on top of that, but you definitely get a wee bit of the kind of brown muscovado sugar. You can definitely smell a bit of that. A big Imperial Stout like this, of course, is going to have a very long wort boil, I would say. This, of course, determines the colour of your beer. The colour of your beer is determined by the type of malts that you use. That determines the magnitude of colour. The wort boil, the more you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you get a darker colour of beer. And adjuncts and barrel aging, of course, are going to play a role in that too. But when it comes to Imperial Stouts, even with this one, when you've got 15 adjuncts and bourbon barrel aging, I don't think that's going to affect the colour too much, right enough. But yeah, you know, you've got all of that going on with this one, and when you've got a beer that's kind of black as night as this, it's going to have a very long boil actually. And so the adjuncts in this beer, I don't know exactly at what point in the process they would add them. I mean, would they add them for the fermentation, or would they add some of them in the during the wort boil as well actually? I'm not 100% certain about that, to be quite honest with you. So yeah, it could be a mix. Some of them might have been added later on, and some of them might have been added during the wort boil. That's maybe a good question to ask Mikael when I do actually get to meet him at some stage. But yeah, as I say, you can smell a little bit of that kind of brown sugary note. That's where I was going with the comments about the wort boil. You can definitely smell a little bit of that treacly molasses kind of note in there, but it's a bit brighter and a little bit more kind of toasty because you've got the kind of muscovado sugar in there, which is quite interesting. It's quite a bright but still quite toasty brown sugary note. Good bit of dark chocolate, like I said, and then you've got all the other stuff coming out of this one. So like I say, you can smell the cardamom, you can smell the ginger in this one. Those are jumping out at me. The vanilla's playing a big role, like I said, and the licorice. I think the vanilla and the licorice are the ones that kind of sit on top of everything else. Those are the ones that come to me straight off. So let's have a wee look at the list again and just see what else we're saying in this one. So yeah, vanilla, we picked that up. Cinnamon, cacao, I guess, is going to give you the chocolate notes. The tonka beans, actually, that's interesting. I didn't really mention the tonka beans in this one, but yeah, licorice, yeah, salt we didn't really mention. Ginger, cardamom, yeah, those come out. Muscovado sugar, yeah. Coconut we didn't really mention. The coffee, that's interesting. The coffee is definitely taking a bit of a back seat in this one as well. But poppy seeds and nutmeg and cloves, you know, potentially this beer, it does have a big kind of spicy character to it, as I say, when you go into the nose. So I can see why, you know, I was focusing on the ginger and the cardamom. And I would say that maybe probably the nutmeg and the cloves and stuff like that are promoting that a little bit. And the anise, the star anise, is going to promote the kind of licorice a little bit. So it's debatable whether I kind of noticed these ones, I would say, because those are going to add kind of complexity to it. But overall, I would say that this beer, the spiciness, you know, the kind of spices that are in this one, those come out quite prominently in the aroma. So it's like you've got a nice woody, bourbony backbone to it. The spices come out quite a lot, and you sort of get the brown sugary elements and the kind of chocolatey notes coming out of it. The coffee, I think, is quite hard to find, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, I don't really find the coffee in this one, although the tonka beans, I think, are coming out now, I would say. So I don't know if the thing is with the tonka beans will give you this little sort of fibrousy note to the aroma, but they're also going to promote the kind of vanilla qualities as well. So again, that's why I would say that it's kind of debatable whether I notice the tonka beans or not. But when you've got 18 adjuncts, not 18, when you've got 15 adjuncts in a beer like this, like I say, it can be quite, you know, overloaded. And this beer is a little bit more of a kind of novelty, I guess, in a sense. That's the thing you've got to remember about this. This one is done to, you know, do something crazy and interesting for a special occasion. So that's the intention behind this one. As I say, there's probably a few Doogie Stouts out there that will come across as a wee bit more balanced and a wee bit more refined than this one's potentially going to be. But we'll stay open-minded as we go into the tasting of this one. But yeah, I have to say, really curious about this. Definitely take a wee bit of time to kind of ponder over the aroma of this beer, because it is really quite interesting. But definitely noticing the tonka beans a little bit more on this one now that my nose has kind of adjusted to it. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things, there's not a lot of hoppy character to this one. You do get a little bit of a smooth earthiness, a little touch of a herbal quality, some kind of floral aromatic notes in there as well, but those are quite minimal, and you've got a wee touch of grassiness. I'd assume with this beer that they've taken a portion of the one that they brewed originally. Either that or they'll have brewed 2 batches of it and then put one in the barrel, of course, and left it for the year. I'm guessing that they might have barrel aged this one for a year, basically, because that seems fairly common, to be honest. But yeah, I'm guessing with that, because you're not getting too much in the way of hoppy character out of this one. There's just a wee touch of grassiness, a wee bit of floral note, and a bit of an earthy kind of herbal kind of thing. So yeah, I do like how this one goes about its business in that regard. So yeah, that's very, very interesting for sure. But on the fruity side of things, there's not a lot of fruity presence to this beer. Maybe a little touch of a kind of light figgy element to it, a little bit of a kind of light black curranty sort of thing. It's got a little bit of a kind of phenolic-y, kind of cakey, cough syrupy type thing to it as well. I don't get so much in the way of like sharper raisin or blackberry or something like that. I'd say like a phenolic sort of fruity, cakey type thing. Bit of black currant, a little bit of a, a little bit of black currant, a little bit of a, as I say, a little touch of a kind of juicy sort of figgy element to it. That's the word I was looking for, figgy notes. So yeah, this is going to be quite interesting to taste it. So a little bit of a longer aroma kind of session with this one, but let's have a taste of this beer and see how we get on. This one is the 16 Stout, a bourbon barrel aged 18% Imperial Stout, 15 adjuncts, bourbon barrel aged from Dugas Brewery up in Landvetter near Gothenburg. This is going to be interesting for sure. Let's get stuck in. Slàinte, skull, cheers, and happy 16th anniversary to Dugas. Now I'm going to say straight away, that beer is ridiculously smooth. It's very, very slick. And it's the interesting thing about this is that it's certainly not the thickest of beers that I've come across from Dugas before. Now, this is kind of twofold. If you've got an 18% Imperial Stout, you do expect it to be a big, thick bugger of a beer. But at the same time, it's bourbon barrel aged. So like I say, you sacrifice a bit of the mouthfeel to get these bourbon-infused flavours and things like that into it. And the other thing I'm going to say about it is that it does cover its alcohol pretty well, actually. It's only later that you start to notice a little bit of the kind of burn down here in the chest and things like that, and a wee bit of it in the back of the throat. So you do get a wee bit of alcohol out of this one, but it does cover its alcohol pretty damn well. So you have to take your hat off to Dugas for that, and they are experts in this at this point, to be quite honest with you. So kudos to them for that. But yeah, this is a big beast of a beer. What you'll find is a lot of these adjuncts, they seem to come out a little bit more in the aftertaste. The beer just tastes like a big kind of chocolatey, slick bourbon barrel aged kind of thing in the beginning. Then a lot of the stuff comes out a wee bit more in the aftertaste. So this beer takes a little bit of time to kind of show you what it's all about for sure. But yeah, let's try and break down the flavour of this one then and see how we go. So, straight away with this beer, of course, you get that smooth, oaky, woody sort of thing. That just forms the backbone of the beer. You can smell that, or you can taste that, sorry. Always do that these days, mix up flavour and aroma. My brain's getting old. But yeah, straight away with this one, lovely kind of smooth, woody, oaky sort of base to it. On top of that, you get that nice layer of kind of brown sugary bourbon. As I've told you before, I always kind of view the Scotch whiskies as being a little bit more spicy, a little bit more kind of grainy and things like this, a little bit drier almost, whereas the American bourbons are a little bit more smooth and sweeter and brown sugary. But you get this nice layer of the kind of bourbon brown sugar sitting on top of that kind of oaky character. And as you move into the kind of front half of that front third of your tongue, you can feel that the woody part of the beer has a wee bit of a kind of vanilla sort of element coming out of it. So I really like how that goes together in this beer for sure. Yeah, the flavours that come out of this one, really interesting. There is, as I said, with the 15, there's quite a bit of kind of sensory overload with this one to a degree, but it still comes across as a very nice beer. So what I'm going to say is, it's difficult to pick out the layers, but it is quite a layered flavour, this one. So sitting on top of that kind of, we'll focus on the middle 30-year palate for the moment. So sitting on top of that kind of brown sugar bourbon barrel age, this is where you get all the kind of spicy elements to it. You get the, the nutmeg for sure. The nutmeg kind of is forming the base, and you've got the kind of ginger and cardamom mixing in with that, and I guess the cloviness is going to be in there as well. So the spicy layer, I think, kind of sits on top of the bourbon, and it really lingers into the aftertaste. That the spicy side of the beer really sits there quite a bit. But at the same time, the more that flavour evolves, you can pick out, the sort of slightly fibrousy type thing from the tonka beans, and that's really interesting too. So you start to see more and more of the elements of this beer just pushing their way out the further you go into the aftertaste. And on the front half of that kind of spicy layer, if you like, I think you get a wee bit of the vanilla. So I think what you're getting in this beer is like sort of clusters of flavour, if you like, in different layers. So you definitely have a wee bit of the you definitely, it feels like on top of that kind of bourbon barrel layer, you've got a sort of, it's almost like the kind of, the more it evolves, it feels like the tonka bean is kind of the thing that's soaking up everything. So you've got the tonka bean and that sort of fibrousy type feel that's going to give you on the front half of that middle third of your palate. The bit of vanilla's in there, but you can feel like the cardamom, the ginger, and the sort of clove and all these kind of spicy flavours kind of being soaked up by that. I think that's what's going on here, and that's really interesting. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the sort of brown sugary and chocolatey elements in this beer as well, and the licorice too is kind of an interesting one, because the licorice feels as if it's sitting on top of that sort of spicy layer. So it's kind of like, the anise and the licorice, of course, are the things that are going to contribute to this. So it feels like on top of the spicy layer of the beer, it's almost like there's a kind of cavity in the middle of that almost, and it's like that cavity is filled with a sort of oily aniseed licorice type thing. So it feels like that's what's going on, that is what's going on with this beer. My words are going to get slurred the more I drink of this beer because it's 18%, so be aware of that as we go forward. But yeah, I think the chocolatey and brown sugary flavours in this beer come out a little bit earlier on, and I'm tempted to say it's almost like, the two layers that I've just described, I'm kind of in two minds, because I'm tempted to say that the chocolatey and brown sugar layer kind of sits in between the bourbon barrel aging and the sort of spicy layer that I've just described to you. But I think the more that you drink of this one and the more your palate adjusts to it, potentially you start to get more of these kind of chocolatey notes coming out of the beer. The coffee, I think, is quite subtle in this one, but you can pick it up, to be honest with you, and we'll come back to the coffee in a minute. But it feels like you've got a nice, I think I'm going to go for that. I think, you can feel in between the sort of spicy layer that I just described to you. It feels like you've, on the back half of that middle third of your palate, it feels like you've got a more bitter dark chocolate, then it gradually moves towards being a more milky chocolate as you go towards the front half of the palate. This is common, we've seen this in other beers before, but in the middle of that, it feels like you've got a bit of that kind of toasty brown sugary element to this one. This beer doesn't have so much of a kind of treacly molasses sort of side to it, but this is something we've seen from bourbon barrel aged beers before. I think a lot of the big thick treacle molasses flavours kind of drop out in favour of the more infused bourbony type flavour from the barrel aging side of things. But yeah, I think that's it. I think we've got bourbon barrel aging, we've got the chocolate and brown sugar, we've got the spicy layer, then we've got the licorice. I think that's a fair assessment of how the flavours kind of build up in this beer. The coffee though, like I said, we're going to come back to the coffee. On the back half of that, or on the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel the sort of coffee bitterness in there, because you do get a little bit of a kind of almost bready build up in there, a wee bit of the kind of coffee bean type quality coming out of the beer, and a bit of the kind of roasty toastiness that you would expect. So that's definitely interesting there. And the coffee for me comes across as being a little bit aromatic, but at the same time kind of roasty and bitter, but there's a smooth earthiness to it as well. Coffee beans, as I've mentioned to you before, one of the most diverse adjuncts that you can put into a beer, in my opinion, because they can give you all sorts of flavours. We won't go into that kind of too much because there's so much flavour kind of going on in this beer, and there's so many other adjuncts. But I love coffee, and I would also put Dugas Brewery down as one of the best coffee stout producers that I've ever come across, and I wish they would do a coffee stout series as well. I would really love that if they did, coffee beans from different farms and countries and stuff like this. That I would love to see them do, because they did some awesome coffee stouts with Hunter and Sons from Bristol back in the day. But yeah, I think that kind of covers the middle third of the palate fairly well on this one. So back third of the palate, you can feel a bit of the bourbon barrel aging is obviously there. You can feel a bit of the kind of smoother, the spicy layer I think kind of moves into the back of the back third of the palate as well, with the tonka beans and it soaking up everything that we mentioned earlier. There is a wee bit of yeastiness kind of sitting on top of that for sure, so the flavour feels a little bit taller in that back third of your palate, but as you move further forward you can feel it just condense down a bit then into that middle third of your tongue. Those 4 layers that we talked about, bourbon barrel aging, chocolate and brown sugar, spice, and then the licorice, that comes out, those kind of are squashed down quite well together, and it gives you this big oily kind of slick beer, if you like. It definitely doesn't come across as the thickest Imperial Stout that I've had, but as I mentioned, a lot of that's down to the effects of the bourbon barrel aging. But on the hoppy side of things then, back corners of the palate, you've got a lovely little bit of earthiness to this one, a wee bit of smoothness. Then as you go further forward, it develops a little bit of a kind of herbal quality, which is interesting, and that herbal quality does push its way forward a little bit, and you get some nice floral aromaticity around at the front corners of the palate. Like we say though, when this is an Imperial Stout, not the most hop forward style of beer, especially when it's bourbon barrel aged, a lot of the hoppy character is going to drop out of this one. But yeah, round the front curve of the palate, you do get a little touch of grassiness. There's a teeny little hint of a kind of zestiness to the beer, I guess we could say as well, and that works out very nicely actually. But yeah, on that front third of your tongue then, where we'll focus on the fruity side of things, border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a sort of cakey type element to the beer, a little bit of a kind of it's almost like a little bit like a kind of spicy chocolate brownie kind of thing that you get out of it. And then the base of that front third of your palate, you can feel a little bit of a kind of cakey note, and there's 1 or 2 of those kind of gingery, cardamom type and clovey type spice things forming that too. On top of that, of course, though, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters roll their way out of the beer. The thing I would say about the fruity side of this beer is that it's quite, it comes across as quite phenolic, that sort of cough syrupy, medicinal type thing. You get quite a little bit of that out of this beer for sure. And the other fruits, there are 1 or 2 other things to point out about this beer as well. But yeah, I'd say that the base layer of the fruits is definitely that sort of phenolic, cough syrupy, medicinal type thing. But yeah, you get some lovely it's got a wee bit of I want to say it's got a wee bit of a datey sultana type thing to it on the back half of that front third of your tongue, but as you move further forward it gets a wee bit more, it does get a little bit more kind of it gets a little bit more kind of, there's a bit of a figgy element to it and a little bit of a kind of black curranty sort of thing. It gets a wee bit more oily, I think, as you go into that front half of the front third of your palate. So yeah, quite phenolic, quite cakey, datey and sultana, and more dried fruit on the back half of that front third of your palate. But then on the front half, I would say a bit more juicy, a bit more kind of juicy, figgy, and kind of black curranty. I don't get so much of a kind of blackberry type note off this one. The blackberries, of course, come across as a little bit more of an oily flavour, but yeah, it's certainly got a nice kind of dried, fruity sort of thing to it as well. But yeah, this is a really interesting beer, this one. In some ways, as I said, with the 15, it feels a little bit like sensory overload. It is a sort of, I don't want to say gimmick because that comes across as negative, but this is one of these beers they brew just, it's sort of for the occasion. It's meant to be a bit crazy and something different. It's, I guess in some ways, this is definitely not the most refined Imperial Stout you're going to come across from Dugas, but it's one that you try for the occasion, if that makes sense. I think that's a fair statement to put out there about this beer. I like it, I do enjoy it, and this is going to be a sipper for the rest of the evening when I'm doing my live stream But this one, I can feel it going to my head already, and at 18%, that shouldn't come as a surprise at all. I'm glad I've got pretzels through there to kind of soak up some of this. But yeah, a really interesting beer, and one that's certainly made for an interesting review, at least in my opinion. But yeah, let's round off the review then with the mouthfeel of this one. So this one, I would say it's kind of bottom end to full bodied. The carbonation's very smooth. It's one of the slicker Imperial stouts, I would say, that I've come across in recent times. But yeah, it's definitely a lovely kind of smooth sort of slickness to this one, as I say. But it works out. I think it works out very, very nicely in that sense too. But yeah, quite a slick, a very slick, smooth Imperial stout, this one. In that sense. But in terms of bitterness and things like that, it's quite difficult in this one to distinguish between the sort of spicy side of the beer and the bitter side of the beer. But I think it's got to come in around, sort of 60-ish IBUs. But remember, this is my weakest point of beer reviewing. The IBU count's always been my weakest point of beer reviewing. But there's a good bit, the malt base has a bit of everything. It's got the lovely kind of infused flavours of the bourbon barrel. It's got the sweetness, I think, of the chocolate and the brown sugar, but the spiciness, and that gives you a wee bit of dryness. And you've also got the kind of oiliness of the kind of licorice aniseed type qualities in this one. A little bit of juicy fruitiness, but a kind of dried fruity quality in there as well, and a wee bit of bitterness from the hops. So yeah, a really interesting stout, this one. Very slick and very smooth, and another kind of solid beer from Dugas Brewery. But like I say, potentially not the most refined stout you're going to come across from these guys. This one is a little bit more of an occasion beer, one that you get and share with your friends for sure. But yeah, definitely cool to get a review of this one done here on the channel. So I think we can round it off there. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Really interesting to try this beer from Dugas, of course. Happy 16th anniversary to them once again. Thank you for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Dugas Brewery. We will return to these guys in the future. I've got no doubt about that. I always keep an eye on the beers that they're reviewing. But in the meantime, please like, subscribe, share. Check out my social media, check out Dugas Brewery. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. And now I'm going to go through and enjoy a bit of a live stream. So, Sláinte, Skål, cheers, and see you guys on the next review. Make sure you try the 16 Stout, their 16th anniversary Imperial Stout, 15 adjuncts, barrel aging, 18% ABV from Dugas Brewery in Landvetter near Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden. Sláinte, Skål, and cheers.